Very happy now to be joined by Massachusetts Senate Minority Leader Bruce Tarr. Senator Tarr, welcome back.
Hi, Rick. It's great to be back and great to see you as well, Bill.
Thanks, Senator.
Well, we want to start right at the top here, Senator. I think it was yesterday or today on tartalk.com talking about the amazing numbers coming into Massachusetts with respect to the budget review. So why don't we start there?
So, sure, Rick. And, this is something that I have to preface with. It's bad news, but it's something we're going to have to manage through. So what we saw were May tax collections, and we got those numbers yesterday. And they indicated that for May, we collected $320 million less than what we had budgeted for. But I have to put that into context because the budget numbers were based on a time before the pandemic. And so we knew that there would be a gap, and we knew there'd be a negative gap. But what's more concerning is that when you look at the entire remainder of the fiscal year, we are down by about $2.25 billion. And that's with just a month left in the fiscal year because fiscal year 2021 starts on July 1st. So we've got a really challenging task in front of us to be able to close that gap. But it isn't all due to the things you might suspect. I mean, clearly unemployment is playing a role here. The closure of businesses is playing a role. But we've also delayed a couple of important deadlines, like the filing deadline for income tax, which we moved to July 15th, which is actually in the next fiscal year. And on some of the business taxes, like sales and meals, we had pushed off the deadline to June 20th. So some of this is due to timing, but obviously a lot of it is due to the pandemic, and we're going to have to manage through that. The positive news comes in on a couple of fronts. Number one, we think that we're going to get federal money that's going to help us to close that gap. Number two, the governor has indicated that he thinks that by reconfiguring some things and finding some savings, we'll be able to close that gap. And number three, and this is a story that I don't think you'll be reading about a lot in the newspapers, but I think is really important, is that we authorized to be sold some bonds in anticipation of tax collections and federal receipts. Those are called RANs, Revenue Anticipation Notes. And for many states, it might be a rather bleak picture when you went into the marketplace to sell those bonds. But we think in Massachusetts, there'll be a lot of investors who will want to buy our bonds because of our fiscal discipline and because of the size of our stabilization fund at $3.5 billion. So we think we're going to be able to manage through that. But I do want to underscore just how big of a challenge it is to try to close that gap.
You can also borrow, right? Isn't one of the plans to borrow temporarily to get into the next fiscal year to get past this month of June?
That's right, Bill. That's what the RANs notes are. They're essentially short-term notes that we sell, and that's our way of borrowing. We allow people to invest in Massachusetts, and we collect the proceeds of that. So that's exactly what that is. And Bill, it's significant that in order to do that, whenever you pledge the full faith and credit of the Commonwealth, you need a 2/3 vote of the legislature, and we got a unanimous vote in the House and the Senate. So it speaks a lot to how people are working together to try to manage through the crisis.
What's the latest? Oh, I'm sorry, Bill. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Rick.
Well, I was just going to ask Senator about the latest with respect to reopening, because it seems to be rolling right along. The weather has been great. People are getting outside, and I know for one, I'm looking forward to going out to dinner.
Well, I think there's good news coming on that, Rick. So as you know, we're in a 4-phase plan, and we have been in phase 1. And the soonest that phase 2 could start is this coming Monday. And it will only start if we meet particular health metrics. And it looks pretty good. Like things are moving in the right direction. And I always am hesitant to talk about this because we still have deaths. So we got the report yesterday that we'd had another 50 deaths and another few hundred cases. So it isn't that we aren't still dealing with hardship and the pain of death, but those numbers are moving in the right direction in terms of a decreasing trend to be able to allow us to open next week on June 8th. But it's also important to understand that this is a phased reopening as well. So within phase 2, the first phase for restaurants allows outdoor dining, and then hopefully later in phase 2 we can have some indoor dining. But if the weather is good, Cape Ann's a great place to be, Rick, and I know there are a number of places that you're aware of where you'll be able to go and dine outside, again, hopefully next week.
What are the other reopening pieces in the days or weeks ahead, possibly, depending on those metrics, as you point out?
So there are phases 3 and 4, Bill, as we go. But just to reiterate, so phase 2 includes a lot of the major things that you would think about. So hotels and motels, retailers, in addition to restaurants, but with restrictions. So in other words, it's important to understand that retailers won't be allowed to have a full store. They'll be limited. I believe the amount was either 8 people or 40% of their capacity. I don't have it right in front of me at the moment. So this is not a reopening to normal. This is a reopening with conditions. And the same is going to be true of hotels and motels, and the same is going to be true of restaurants. And I'll give you an example. One of the debates that was had on the reopening advisory board and in state government was, what should be the metric for reopening a restaurant in terms of who can be in it when it can be open for indoor dining? And originally, the reopening advisory board had thought it should be a percentage of its licensed capacity. But a lot of us weighed in on that and suggested that that isn't the best measure. The best measure is how many tables can you fit and maintain adequate distancing? And how can you have enough space so that we look from a performance standard perspective rather than just a fixed number or percentage. And that's actually the view that prevailed. So there'll be a lot of important restrictions as we go along. The other thing, Bill, I think that your question alludes to that's important is this is a fluid plan. It is constantly evolving. It is never fixed in stone. And so when we look at phase 2, we're going to see a lot of the things that we would think about being reopened, the ones that I've mentioned. We still have phase 3 and we still have phase 4. Phase 4 is really what's called a new normal. And it will only really happen if there's a vaccine or an improvement in therapeutic drugs that are available to fight COVID-19. So phase 4 is really a way off still. And phase 3 generally involves things where people may be gathered together more than they're going to be allowed to do so in phase 2. By the way, I've spoken in a lot of detail. All of this is available on mass.gov. If you go to the reopening page, you can look at all the businesses and where they fit, and you can look at industry-specific guidance for each of them as to what they're going to need to do to be able to open.
I love it when the student becomes the teacher. That is really cool. Senator, reaction right now, perhaps to the nationwide reaction, I guess, if you will, and demonstrations and so on from the State House. What's the feeling?
Well, I would tell you, Rick, people here are as outraged as they are everywhere else with what we saw happen to George Floyd. And I will tell you, I am personally outraged by it. That type of thing should not happen. And so folks here have been very vocal about that. My colleagues have. The Black and Latino Caucus held a press conference this week to talk about a multi-pronged plan to try to address racism in Massachusetts. And, you know, I have been heartened to see the peaceful nature of a lot of what's been happening. People getting out to the street and just saying these kind of things are unacceptable. And I think that that is part of being American, being able to go into the public square and voice your opinion. I am much more disappointed in those that have chosen violence as their means of expression. It is not helpful. It is counterproductive. And I am disappointed that that kind of activity has taken place. And I hope it will not take place in the future. But, you know, to me, there's really two sides to this. You saw, for instance, in the Boston protest, the largest one that happened, the first one, you almost saw a tale of two protests. You saw the daytime part of that event that was peaceful. It had a large number of people, and that was powerful in a positive way. In the evening, you saw folks resort to violence, and that was negative in a positive way. And, you know, as I said on Twitter this week, I think the thing here is for us to all remember our own humanity. And that is the common thread that unites us all. And everyone should be treated equally and fairly and with respect and dignity. And if we just recalibrate to that standard, and then we do everything that we need to make it the reality everywhere, I think we'll be a stronger country. So I've had a lot of mixed emotions that I think a lot of people have had as they've watched some of these events unfold. I will tell you, Rick, that I'm at the State House now, and every time we've talked, I've been at the State House. And I have been here on a number of evenings in Boston at the State House, and business has continued for the most part as normal. The Senate has not been in session in a formal session, so we've been doing informals, and those are generally in the daytime. But last night I was here as we were trying to pass a municipal bill into the evening, and we got that done, and we were able to do so because of the outstanding security that we have here from a number of different agencies.
Do you want to just add a note on that municipal bill, Senator?
Yeah, I'd love to, Bill. So one of the difficulties is right now trying to do things like hold town meetings because these aren't normal circumstances. So we've been working on this for a while, and frankly, I'm glad we finally got it done and got it to the governor's desk. And I won't go into all of the elements of it, but I will tell you some of the key pieces. So one of them allows communities that have representative town meeting to have a remote town meeting using technology like we are right now. Another piece looks at open town meeting, which most communities have, and allows them to reduce their quorum to 10% or not less than 10% of what they would normally have. A third piece of the bill that I know would be important to both of you is to allow for emergency certification of teachers, which has been something that we've been asked for by a number of school districts to try to get people online being able to teach both remotely and in anticipation of reopening of the schools in the fall. So there are a number of different pieces to the bill, but communities really need this because they need to be able to hold town meetings, try to get budgets in place, and try to continue with the operations of local government. And I would point out that another piece of this actually allows communities to hold a town meeting in a location that is not in that community. And the example I've been using is the town of Rowley, which does not have a big enough space to hold town meeting outside. So instead, they're going to move and they're going to go over to the Triton Regional School, which is in Newbury, and they're going to hold their town meeting on the football field. They couldn't do that without the authorizations that are contained in this bill. And I'm hoping that the governor is going to sign it imminently.
Yeah, new realities. Senator Tarr, once again, thank you very, very much for being with us, and hopefully we can do this again in the not too distant future.
Absolutely. Rick and Bill, thank you so much. And I hope that when we talk next, we'll be talking about a successful beginning to phase 2 reopening. And we're going to get a restaurant review from you, Rick.
Okay, we'll be there. Thank you, Senator.